My name is Chris Chang, and I am the Outreach Chair for Boston University's Chinese Students Association. Would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. My name is Christina Lee. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Clinical Practice at the School of Social Work.
All right, so the main purpose of today's interview is to bring awareness and address the rising anti-Asian sentiment in the United States. So the first question I have for you is, as you know, there's been a rise of anti-Asian racism running through our country. What are your thoughts on these issues?
Well, thank you for asking. I think that discrimination against Asians has always been an issue. And with COVID-19, we know that there's been an increase in hate crimes. For example, StopAAPIHate.org has documented nearly 3,000 hate crimes in 2020 alone. But I believe these numbers to be a gross underestimate. In New York City, many police officials say that additional incidents went underreported or were not classified as hate crimes. A hate crime is an event whereby there's evidence that identity is the motivating factor.
Do you think this has been an underlying issue for years now?
Yes, I do. But I just think that the COVID-19 has made things much worse.
Next question, why do you think the hate crimes against Asian Americans are not receiving mainstream media coverage? Do you think this is the work of the model minority myth?
I think this is a great point. Hate crimes are underreported because complaints from Asian Americans, I believe, are not taken seriously. Asians are politically and socially not as visible as other groups, or they're seen, to your point, as model minorities who don't need help. So in any case, Asians are seen as permanent foreigners. And I think this is all exacerbated by the stigma that Asians in the community attach to bringing attention to ourselves for negative events and the desire to live in peace and to accept negative events and to move on. So I think that that all said, it's important to raise awareness and report hate crimes. So according to Chris Kwok, who is a board member at the Asian American Bar Association in New York City, it's important to classify something as a hate crime because then people know that there's going to be consequences. So for example, two early events during the COVID-19, one was, everyone knows about this, it was a woman was doused with caustic acid in New York City, and a second, a grandmother was set on fire in her apartment. Neither of those events were classified as hate crimes, and if they were, it would have changed the trajectory.
How do you think we should combat the issues of the mass media not covering these crimes?
My recommendation is to increase political visibility as a group, fund organizations that report Asian American hate crimes, develop clear reporting guidelines that are responsive and timely, and we need to send the message that that hate crimes are unacceptable and that we have to protect the most vulnerable.
In what ways can us students at BU help and support the cause?
I think you guys are doing great just sending out this spreading awareness through social media, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to answer these great questions.
Thank you. How do you think the view that my minority group has suffered more than yours has played out on an individual and collective action or inaction during times like these?
A few decades ago, I wrote a paper that I never published, but it observed that the model minority myth was created as a way to pit ethnic groups against each other. So this is a way of supporting the system that oppresses all people. So for example, if Asians are pointed to as the success story, then it conveys the message that other ethnic groups really need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, because look at the Asians, we can do it without any help. So this is a way of delegitimizing the struggles and unique situations of other groups. And most importantly, it distracts attention from the real problem, which is that there's a lack of resources given to all groups. So I think that in this climate, we need to be mindful of that and to focus on getting more resources and to make the system more fair and less oppressive for all, and to not go against one group or another for being racist.
Before we end this interview, do you have any final thoughts?
I have 2 points. The first is to remember the most vulnerable. We know that these include the elderly. We know that women are disproportionately targeted compared to men by a ratio of 3 to 1. But I think a really invisible and vulnerable population are Asian American school children and youth. So a few years ago, I don't know if you remember the publication of the Tiger Mom book, but at that time, I got a letter signed by several community organizations that, kind of said, the book was very stereotypical, and it kind of, in a way that was not helpful, and in fact could exacerbate the mental health crisis for Asian youth in the schools. So, according to this letter that I read, that I was going to send to the Wall Street Journal, but it was typical for kids to be bullied physically and emotionally at schools. I heard some, and then, if you think about it, when they return home, kids return to parents who expect them to be perfect, right? To get straight A's. And I thought the downside of the book, so there's pressure all around. And I just thought the downside of the book would be to promote this stereotyping among families and in society. So I think much more needs to be done to promote the mental health of Asian kids and youth. We need to teach them skills on self-esteem, how to speak up in class, how to understand and to deal with racism and to reverse its effects, not to let stereotyping get to you. And I think, I would say the second thing is to support Asian political groups. This is for the BU students, but people in general. Support the organizations like AAPI that report Asian hate crimes to hold people accountable. Don't suffer in silence, and speak up to make things better for everybody. So those would be my two things.